Controversial topics in history. Examining the debates that continue to divide. History is not just a record of past events. It is also a field of ongoing debate and interpretation. Many historical topics remain controversial, as differing perspectives, new evidence, and changing social norms lead to continuous re-evaluation of the past. These controversial topics often spark passionate discussions, revealing the complexities of history and its lasting impact on the present. Here are some of the most controversial topics in history. The legacy of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus is often credited with discovering the Americas in 1492, a narrative that has long been celebrated in Western history. However, Columbus's legacy is highly controversial, as his arrival in the Americas led to the colonization, exploitation, and decimation of indigenous populations. Critics argue that Columbus's voyages initiated centuries of genocide, slavery, and cultural destruction, and they challenge the glorification of Columbus as a hero. The debate over Columbus's legacy has led to calls for the removal of statues, the renaming of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, and a broader re-examination of the impact of European colonization on the Americas. The use of the atomic bomb on Japan. The decision by the United States to drop atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 remains one of the most hotly debated topics in history. Supporters argue that the bombings were necessary to bring about a swift end to World War II, saving countless lives that would have been lost in a prolonged conflict. Critics, however, contend that the use of atomic weapons was unjustified and inhumane, as it caused the deaths of over 200,000 people, most of them civilians, and ushered in the nuclear age with its catastrophic potential. The moral and ethical implications of the bombings continue to be discussed by historians, politicians, and the public, raising questions about the use of extreme measures in warfare. The Atlantic slave trade and reparations. The transatlantic slave trade, which forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas between the 16th and 19th centuries, is a deeply painful and controversial chapter in history. The legacy of slavery continues to affect descendants of enslaved people, and debates over reparations for slavery have gained prominence in recent years. Proponents of reparations argue that compensatory measures are necessary to address the enduring economic and social inequalities caused by slavery and systemic racism. Opponents, however, contend that reparations are impractical or unjust, arguing that current generations should not be held accountable for the actions of their ancestors. The controversy over reparations reflects broader debates about race, justice, and historical responsibility. The Armenian Genocide. The mass killings of Armenians by the Ottoman Empire during World War I, often referred to as the Armenian Genocide, is a highly contentious issue. An estimated 1.5 million Armenians were killed through massacres, forced marches, and starvation, leading many historians and countries to recognize the events as genocide. However, the Turkish government vehemently denies that the killings constituted genocide, arguing that the deaths were part of a broader conflict in which both Armenians and Turks suffered. The dispute over terminology has led to diplomatic tensions, with some countries avoiding the term genocide to maintain relations with Turkey. The controversy over the Armenian Genocide highlights the challenges of reconciling historical memory with national identity and politics. The role of religion in history. Religion has played a central role in shaping societies, cultures, and conflicts throughout history, making it a topic of considerable controversy. Debates over the influence of religion in events such as the Crusades, the Inquisition, and the Reformation often center on the relationship between faith, power, and violence. Additionally, the role of religion in the founding of nations, such as the United States, continues to be debated, particularly in discussions about the separation of church and state. The impact of religious beliefs on social issues, including gender roles, sexuality, and science, remains a source of tension, as different interpretations of history can lead to vastly different conclusions about the role of religion in shaping human progress. The Holocaust denial and revisionism. The Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by Nazi Germany during World War II, is one of the most well-documented and universally condemned atrocities in history. However, Holocaust denial and revisionism continue to persist, with some individuals and groups attempting to minimize or deny the extent of the genocide. These efforts often stem from anti-Semitic ideologies and seek to undermine the historical consensus on the Holocaust. Holocaust denial is not only a distortion of history, but also a form of hate speech that can perpetuate dangerous beliefs. The controversy over Holocaust denial highlights the importance of historical accuracy, education, and the ongoing fight against prejudice and misinformation. The Vietnam War, a nation divided. The Vietnam War, which took place from 1955 to 1975, remains one of the most controversial conflicts in American history. The war, fought between Communist North Vietnam and US-backed South Vietnam, was part of the larger Cold War struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The decision to intervene in Vietnam was highly divisive, with supporters arguing that it was necessary to prevent the spread of communism, while opponents saw it as an unjust and unwinnable conflict. The anti-war movement, which grew in strength during the 1960s, brought protests, civil unrest, and a profound questioning of U.S. foreign policy. The legacy of the Vietnam War continues to shape debates over military intervention, the ethics of warfare, and the role of government in shaping public opinion. The colonization of Africa. The colonization of Africa by European powers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often referred to as the Scramble for Africa, is a deeply controversial topic. European nations carved up the African continent, exploiting its resources and people for their own gain, often with little regard for the well-being of the local populations. The legacy of colonization, including the arbitrary borders drawn by colonial powers, continues to affect African nations today, contributing to conflict, poverty, and underdevelopment. The debate over colonization also raises questions about the nature of imperialism, the responsibility of former colonial powers, and the ways in which history is remembered and taught. The Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the most complex and contentious issues in modern history, with deep historical roots that continue to fuel tensions today. The conflict centers on competing national claims to the land of historic Palestine, with both Israelis and Palestinians asserting their right to sovereignty. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948, following the Holocaust and the end of British rule, led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, an event known as the Nakba. Since then, the conflict has involved multiple wars, intifadas, uprisings, and peace efforts, none of which have resolved the underlying issues. The controversy over the conflict extends to debates over human rights, international law, and the role of external powers, including the United States and the United Nations. The legacy of colonialism and imperialism. Colonialism and imperialism, which saw European powers dominate much of the world from the 15th to the 20th centuries, remain highly controversial topics. While some argue that colonialism brought modernization and development to colonized regions, others point to the exploitation, violence, and cultural destruction that accompanied imperial rule. The legacy of colonialism is still felt in many parts of the world, where former colonies struggle with issues of identity, economic inequality, and political instability. Debates over colonialism also extend to questions of reparations, historical memory, and the ways in which colonial history is taught and understood. The Civil Rights Movement, Progress and Backlash. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s is often celebrated as a triumph of justice and equality in the United States. However, the movement and its legacy remain controversial, particularly in discussions about race, systemic inequality, and the limits of progress. While the civil rights movement achieved significant legal victories, including the end of segregation and the passage of the Voting Rights Act, many argue that racial disparities continue to persist in areas such as education, housing, and criminal justice. The backlash against the movement, both during its time and in the present day, reflects ongoing tensions over race and civil rights in America. The debate over the movement's successes and shortcomings continues to shape discussions about social justice and the struggle for equality. Conclusion: controversial topics in history remind us that the past is not a fixed narrative, but a dynamic field of interpretation and debate. These issues challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths, question established narratives, and engage with differing perspectives. By examining these controversial topics, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of history and the ways in which it continues to influence our world today.